somehow, and also properly get that little girl over there.
Yes.
So that not to have her over here. Doing my best not to be distracted. Not doing very well. I really
First principles.
Okay, so first principles begin with each of us individually has learned all sorts of things from our parents or other people's parents or school teachers, from all sorts of disparate and disconnected sources, which we are expected to believe, even when they're contradictory, even when they're mutually exclusive. And we need to figure out which of these multitude of different rules actually apply in our lives. That is a fundament of how you can live successfully and happily. A fundament of having proper expectation management. Being able to recognize what matters and what doesn't. What's real, what is a fabrication that we accepted because it felt right at the time, or because even if it didn't feel right, we did not have the ability to determine for ourselves, or the belief that we could determine for ourselves, whether it was real or not. So you asked earlier, how do you know when the data that you collected is valid? How do you know that you're using the right filters to figure things out? And the answer I've always used.
Yeah, when it's coming at you, it's tremendous volume and velocity.
There's an infinite quantity of data.
Mm-hmm.
Just open your eyes or listen. It's important to remember that the quieter it becomes, the more you can hear. And there's a lot of value in reducing the noise floor inside your mind. The reason that meditation works so well for people who recognize the value of meditation is that they effectively reduce the noise floor. They stop having such a huge quantity of otherwise unnecessary chatter, most of which comes from their ego, trying to grab a hold of the reins and steer you into things that your ego believes are in its best interest. As I said, living within your comfort zone pretty much guarantees no progress of any significant nature. You will have occasionally advancements. You will occasionally evolve as things that never made sense begin to make sense, and you become more connected. And sometimes things that you've always known and accepted demonstrate themselves to be false. Each of us, throughout our lives, is going to come across all sorts of things that invalidate other things we've always known and accepted. Things we've known and accepted for so long, we never ever challenged them. The trick for us all is to remember that anything we know, that we can't remember explicitly when we learned and when we proved them to ourselves, we must treat as suspect. So someone was dedicated to not testing, because if they tested, there was a high likelihood, a near certainty, that they would discover that things that they had accepted as true might not be true. I remember once having a great conversation with a friend of mine's uncle who was a Roman Catholic priest. We were talking about religion, talking about philosophy. And we talked for a couple hours at this family function. At the end of it, he got very gruff and he stood up and he said, "You were sent here by God to test my faith." And I said, "Well, okay then, I guess that does it. There's really nothing I can say to respond to that." I was actually kind of hurt. And I said, "I'm going to leave that with you. You can talk about it anytime you like."
He checkmated you, but all the pieces were covered in shit.
If you like. A better way to say it was, he stood up and flipped over the board and said, "I'm going."
Yeah.
So anything that we accept as known that we actually have not gone back to test without question.
No, you're putting the words in the wrong order. Everything that we accept as known, things we have always known, things we have never needed to test because we've always known. It's always been known. Until we can test them independently, must be treated as suspect. Everything we've always accepted must be treated as suspect until we can actually test them. Who invented the incandescent light bulb?
The story is Edison, but there's probably something else.
Probably.
Yeah.
Everyone knows a bunch of things. Who created the wireless radio?
It's the story is Marconi, but Tesla has patents that Marconi built on, which no one talks about. And there could be something else that I don't know about.
Sure. Who invented the telephone? Well, on the same day that Alexander Graham Bell filed for his patent on telephone, someone in France filed for a patent on telephone that was basically identical. And Alexander Graham Bell won that battle because he was about 6 hours ahead. So at the end of the day, lots of things that we accept without question, and other people accept without question, we all know because it's always been known. And as a group, the greater the number of participants, the higher the likelihood that everyone will become so dedicated to accepting these things they have known that anyone who dares say something different should expect to be attacked, firstly ridiculed, then violently opposed. And this happens all the time. Constantly.
The majority against the minority, huh?
It's more a question of the majority will always be fundamentally simple-minded, fundamentally prone to not realizing that their parents, in the role of grown-ups, didn't know everything, told them things that they accepted without having ever tested, so enforced and reinforced wrong ideas. Mark Twain brilliantly said, "It is far easier to fool someone than to convince them they have been fooled." Make a mental note of that because it's very true.
That's good. Mm-hmm.
Or as Will Rogers said, the problem ain't with what we don't know. It's what we know that just ain't so. We know all sorts of stuff that just isn't true. We accept all sorts of stuff that just isn't true. Like I said earlier, we all know that oil is a fossil fuel, except we can find oil on planets where there's no reason to believe there was ever any sort of life form. We can also find oil far, far deeper down than there's any reason to believe, any way to imagine that the biomass that had been on the surface could possibly have gotten down. If you were to take the Earth, make it the size of a billiard ball, take a piece of tissue, you could dry it off in a way that you pretty much couldn't sense there was any moisture on the tissue. That's how little water there is on the Earth.
You said the majority is always against the minority. Is that because progress always depends on the minority historically? And that's just a mechanism for the status quo to protect itself?
You're putting words in my mouth. I did not say the majority was always against the minority. What I said was, most people, by far, are going to tend to go with what they were told, not realize that there's any point in questioning it, and most of those people will be very frustrated if suggestions are made that they should challenge these things they know.
So unintentionally against?
Unwittingly.
Unwittingly, got it.
I don't care who tells you things. Don't accept things until you've independently investigated them yourself.
Yeah.
Don't accept what I'm saying as factually based until you have a chance to examine it yourself. I will flat out promise you I will never, ever tell you anything I don't believe is accurate at the time. And, as I said, I work very hard to make sure that my data is clean and that my results are reasonable and you can find the same answers I do. But it is important, it is urgent. You not bluff to your students, your clients, your colleagues, your friends, because as soon as they know that you play fast and loose with reality, your credibility is shot. As soon as someone identifies a single lie in something you said, then you establish that you are a liar. So you have to be very conscientious.